This next presentation on the Ed Gray purple motor, I guess kind of been a long time coming. I know that when these motors were first made available, the blue one that Al Francoeur has and the purple one here, I think John Riley, who somehow got his hands on them through some estate deal or whatever, I was basically the first person, I believe, that he contacted to purchase these motors. At that time, I didn't have the money and didn't have that much interest in these particular motors because I didn't really understand the whole history of what was going on. But the whole Ed Gray story kind of, in my world, kind of happened in the early 2000s. Peter had come out with a book called The Free Energy Secrets of Cold Electricity, which I guess you could say is kind of his thesis on how he saw the technology working. And then soon after that, John Bedini said, well, you essentially have it correct. Here's my drawings. John Bedini went and visited Ed Gray with his friend and partner Marvin Cole years ago. I'm sorry, Ron Cole. Too many Coles. And with him and Ron Cole, and they were able to analyze and look at it. And John had written up multiple diagrams on the gray motor, the gray tube, how it was switching. There was this interesting diode that everybody said he drew in the wrong direction, which he didn't. At that time when I looked at the drawings, I didn't know too much about it or how a diode really was supposed to work. And that was the only thing that ever really made sense to me, and is how I came up with the little plasma ignition circuit, which is kind of an analogy of that circuit. After a while, Al Francoeur wound up with the blue motor. Reggie has had this one quite a while. I think Reggie contacted me years ago about this, and right around the same time, Mark McKay, or after John put out those drawings, somebody named Gary McGrattan had been doing some experiments and posted it online and said if anybody writes him, he'll send his report of his experiments. And when I contacted Gary McGrattan and he sent it to me and he saw I was in Spokane, Washington, he said, hey, there's somebody else in Spokane, Washington experimenting with this. So he put me in touch with Mark McKay, took my friend Jeff out there. Jeff happened to know Mark's one of his family members. And Mark had given me a few parts to experiment with, and I think we went into the back of one of the trailers that was kind of set up where Mark was doing some experiments. And from then Mark was so passionate about trying to get to the answer of what this gray motor business is about, and went on a journey for, I guess, several years, meeting Gray family members, engineers, investors, trying to get to the bottom of the story. He's presented, I believe, 2 times on emediapress.com. There's the history of the EV Gray motor. You can find that on eMedia Press if you want to see his previous 2 presentations. This particular presentation is going to be specifically the history of this particular motor, because each motor has its own, each color-coded motor has its own very unique history. Mark is the world's leading authority on the history of the EV Gray technology, and actually 12 plus years of analysis of this unique free energy phenomenon has opened up new possibilities into reverse engineering this powerful yet lost discovery. Mr. McKay has 35 years of engineering experience in industrial power and control systems. He received a bachelor's in science in electrical engineering from New Mexico State in 1974, and is a professional engineering in the state of Washington. Please welcome Mark McKay.
So this is an age-changing technology if it wasn't destroyed or wasn't ruined accidentally by ignorance. We'd be living in a completely different world, and if we can ever crack the nut as to how this thing did its thing back then, we would be living in a new world. The whole energy, oil issue and all the geopolitical processes would probably be vastly different. So I'd like to go over the history of how this particular motor came about and kind of broadly touch on the overall technology that was developed and then lost. Well, he took that technology that Marvin Cole had, and he built his own motor. This is called the EMA-6, which was on display in 1976. Unfortunately, he had a few bugs to work out. This thing here, when it was demonstrated, only put out 2 horsepower. So, 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 2 Later, he was working on it. They finally got it going pretty good, but when this thing, with this non-classical process that generates all these forces, also generates a lot of EMI. So the FCC descended upon them, confiscated all the motor, run it through a shredder, and it was never seen again. Well, that didn't deter him. In 1979, he got Gray and Mr. Hackenberger and Gray's oldest son, Mark Gray, got a huge grant from to go to Dodge City, Kansas, and manufacture this whole series of motors. And you can see the purple motor is right here, but they have the white motor, the gold motor, the black motor, and there was a blue motor that's not pictured here, and one at the end that I don't know what it is. So this is what we ended up today, and this is probably how this the purple motor was also reconfigured in 1979. Also, an interesting thing is you'll notice there's all these jacks on the side here, a bunch here, a bunch in the front. These things were configured not as complete systems, but as test systems, and all the various subsystems came out on these jacks, so you could hook it up this way, and you could hook it up that way, and you could put a meter here, and you could put a meter there. It was still a evaluation presentation. So some of the other systems, this was the charging system. Now, this particular technology, for reasons I'll explain later, you can't start the motor from 0 speed. You have to speed it up to a minimum of 500 RPM. Okay, so they were able to use a generator, which also served a generator that could also be used as a starter. So in one configuration, you'd turn it on as a start motor, get this thing going up to 500 RPM, have it working in mode, then you could take the energy off the shaft and run a generator to recharge some of the batteries. And this was how they did it. Here's a detail of the Ignitron trigger card. Here's showing the outboard relays, which have been removed from this box here because they're not necessary for the main technology involved. Stuff there. These are open core coils. These are not closed core coils like what you have in an induction motor. This is much like the induction coils, like your ignition coil and things like that. With the open core design and you don't have a complete magnetic path, it reduces the K factor between the primary and the secondary windings. But you can still look at the shape there and going, what the heck? There's a purpose for that, in my opinion. So here's kind of the overall power windings. That's a little simpler from that first diagram. So then if you look at the patent, the 0 degree reference is right when these two minor magnets are right in that position. So I assume, well, that was where the arc was struck, and then as the motor runs, the arc is stretched over this insulator, and at some point it's eventually got to quench or be disconnected. So then they go on to the next one. In the purple motor, you don't have all those electromagnets. It's a much simpler design. So if you look at this one, I figure, boy, that looks an awful lot like one is providing the arc against the other one there with that sharp point, and the other one having kind of a rounded nose. That's merely speculation on my part. But if you look back at these, the wire is actually connected with a crimp terminal to the core face for the purpose of this demonstration. Okay, now we go into hidden secret number 3, the second battery. This is one that's been overlooked. Peter had it figured out, though. In the beginning, when they were doing the popping coil stuff, they had to have 2 batteries to run their power supply. Why do they have to have 2 batteries? Well, it was alleged so that you use the power from one, you charge up for the other, and then you switch them, is what the line was given to the observers and potential investors. This in itself was a pretty impressive device. It was a switch mode power supply that used old chopper vibrators. Today we'd be calling it a switching power supply, but it was a mechanical one back then. But he probably had it wired up differently to take advantage of getting a lot of high voltage feedback current. And if you look closely, and other people have, the wire that he's got wrapped around that bottle in the center is rusting, which implies that he was also using iron wire. So these four pioneers, who did, as far as I could tell, legitimate work, but each one of these systems, for one reason or another, was not commercially viable, or nobody understood it, or you're all familiar with the problems. So, in my case, I figure it's an idea worth exploring. So this is my current setup here. This is a reconstructed Stubblefield coil using iron wire from the garden store and 12-gauge copper wire because they happen to be the same diameter.
Hello, okay. So your experiment there where you could only get 1 amp through the iron wire.
Right.
Okay, so if you go back to the Crosby report, they said that the front end of that thing only was 26 watts.
Right.
So 1 amp isn't a problem
Oh, probably not.
for the way the machine actually worked.
Well, they ran it into a inverter, and bumped that voltage up to a lot higher.
Yeah.
And then they pulsed it at 1,500 volts, 3,000, 5,000, I don't know what.
Right.
And I'm pulsing it at 24 volts.
Right.
So I don't think I'm quite in the window of operation, but I'm trying to find something that looks different enough so I can say, aha, here's the difference. We'll try it again and see if we get an improvement.
Yeah.
So I'm just...
The thing is that at 24 volts, the power is so weighted towards magnetism and so not weighted towards
Right.
dielectric that you're really not going to.
Yeah, I'm not in the right
you're not
window
going
of
to be in the
operation.
window.
But I
there.
figure Stubblefield was able to get some action at that. I mean, he was only working
But
with 2 volts.
he had a
He had
mechanical make and break.
Right, well, I got a
and
mechanical make and break too.
Right.
Except it's only one, turn it on, boom, let it off. And his was probably oscillating at 30 to 200 pulses a second or so.
Thank you, Mark McKay.
Thank you very much for coming.